Whenever I'm teaching about these three areas in the classroom, students start to get pretty excited about the brain. And that's not to say they weren't excited about it, but they start to see just how incredible the brain really is. And that's because these three areas are your high order association cortex, which is basically where they are multimodal. They're pulling in information from everywhere. Basically, information is coming all sorts of different places, all into these areas, and they're making sense of it all together. So if you have ever seen, say, the Brodmann areas, for example, right, this is a very reductionist approach to neuroanatomy. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm just trying to show you that, like, when we point out individual points on the brain, and then we can start discussing about their functions, all of that is extraordinarily valuable. But you have to understand that the brain doesn't, work in just these individual areas. It pulls it all together into these multimodal processing areas. And this is where, in my opinion at least, the human experience really starts to come out. And so our goal today is to use this study unit from Kenhub's brand new physiology section. So this is basically just a gigantic lesson. This is a premium feature, but if you want to go ahead and check the link in the description below, we're going to put a link to it's a different study unit, but it's really, really cool. It's on reflex arcs. If you go ahead and check that out and you sign up for Kenhub, which is free to sign up, you're going to see all sorts of free things like access to our images and articles and everything that goes with it. But this is what we're going to be focusing on today. And the goal with this is to just kind of make sense of how things make sense. Does that make sense? So what I want to start with is going to be the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is without question my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm going to have to contain myself. And I mean this, like, my favorite thing in all of human biology to discuss is the prefrontal cortex. So I have to just calm myself down because honestly, this is what makes us human. Right? Humans have the largest prefrontal cortex in the animal kingdom. And that is, the reason why there's 8 billion of us here. And so when you look at this list, so we have it like listed out here, we see decision making. I mean, the ability to make decisions is not unique to humans, but the way we make decisions is definitely going to be unique. And it's like the level of precision and how many steps can be a part of that, including that's why we leads to the planning, right? When you have planning and the ability to go, okay, not only am I going to go there, I'm going to do it this way, that way, like you actually develop a plan. Again, that is not unique to humans, but the way we execute it definitely is. But this is where it gets really, really fascinating, and that is going to be personality expression. You are there, right? When I say you, I mean what makes you. Like imagine someone's trying to like introduce you at a party or something along those lines, and they're just like, hey, this is Jennifer, and she is like this. This is how she does this. She's just this kind of person, right? They're explaining your personality. This is what makes you different from the rest of the other humans. And which is one reason it's really fascinating when you think about like a lobotomy, for example. A lobotomy is here to essentially disconnect or dramatically injure the prefrontal cortex and its ability to connect with deeper states of the brain. And so you're really just eliminating the personality. There's a reason why lobotomies are not ethical and we don't do them anymore. But then we're also going to see social behavior, right? Socialization. I mean, again, other animals do these types of things. And by the way, other animals have personality. I mean, look at your dog, for example. Dogs, right? Cats, they have personalities. It's just we're talking about taking this to the, to the next level. And the way humans socialize is amazing. We are a very social species. We're very communicative. But this is all going to be part of the prefrontal cortex. Now, the thing that you also want to understand here is that this region, when you say prefrontal, it belongs to the frontal cortex. So this whole thing right here, do you see this like a portion of the brain that's, I don't know, like that flesh color? That's probably the best way to put it. This is still the frontal cortex, right? So this whole thing here is the frontal cortex. Well, actually this thing right here, right? But, so this frontal cortex includes way more than just the decision-making planning. We're also going to see like motor control and things like that. But this front portion here is what grew out and got to be very large. And this is the area that takes 25 years to fully develop in human beings. So if you've ever heard someone say, it takes you have to be 25 years old before the brain is, fully online. Specifically, they're talking about a region that's around here. It's called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, but no one wants to say that, so everyone says DLPFC. But that is the part of your brain that's all about rational decision making. So basically, this is where you kind of start to say, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to do this, or maybe it is a good idea to wait and hold on to something because down the line, I can actually have a greater benefit. If you actually look at, say, children, you're going to see their ability to make rational decisions is far less than you would see in even adolescents. And then you start to see, obviously, in adults, but still not fully online. So I want you to imagine this. A 20-year-old is going to be more rational than a 15-year-old, but a 20-year-old is, neurologically speaking, less rational, right? They're more irrational than, say, a 28-year-old. And it's really, really fascinating. There's a lot of cross-cultural studies that show how this works. But the point here is the prefrontal cortex, this is what makes you human. And this is how we have grown to, again, there's 8 billion or so of us on this planet, is our ability to plan, make decisions, be social, and have these personalities that also like just fuel all of this. So this is a very, very exciting area. There's a reason why, I would argue, I would just say this is probably the celebrity of neuroscience is in terms of like neuroanatomy. All right, but the other areas they're still very cool. So we have the parietal association cortex. And so the parietal association cortex here, so this is where you're basically going to start, it's all about like spatial awareness. And, so for example, right, I have a drink, right? So this is like my thermos and I have water in here, right? So when I put this down, basically, even though I'm looking at the lens right now of my camera, I have spatial awareness of where this is at. Now, okay, it's a little bit in my peripheral vision, so I'm gonna look over here. I still have a pretty good spatial awareness to the point where I can grab my hand. I have my hand, and you can't see it because it's off camera, but look at what I did, right? That was very easy. What we're getting at here is you can see like proprioception. Proprioception is basically your body's awareness of where it is in three-dimensional space. It's the reason why when you close your eyes, you don't freak out because you're like, where did my hand go? Right, I can't see it. You're constantly analyzing, positional information. Now, by the way, the proprioception is also part of the cerebellum. There's multiple areas at work here, but this is where your cerebral cortex, right? So this whole area here is the cerebrum. The cerebrum is what is putting all this information together and making sense of it. And so the spatial awareness and proprioception are all going to be very important. And then visual processing and attention is also going to be extraordinarily important here. So visual processing, like you may be thinking like, that doesn't make any sense. I thought the occipital lobe was about, visual processing. It is. It's just a different kind, right? So the occipital, so when we're talking here, these are the primary visual cortices. So like V1, V2, V3, these areas in the occipital lobe back here, this is more about like identifying the object, like visually, right? Like this is where you're doing things like, okay, like here's the border of the object. Okay, now we're making it more clear. Now we're creating a little more depth and there's perspective and perception and you're adding colors and those types of things. The visual processing that occurs inside of the parietal association cortex, this is more about just making sense of what you're seeing. You're putting it all together. You have to understand the brain is very much like a relay, like it's like running a relay race where, you have these stages, these phases of processing and kind of putting it together. You're rendering information. If any of you have ever rendered something, say visually or with a photo or a video, you can see that these things can happen in phases and stages. And that's exactly what happens. So basically the occipital cortices, right? So those visual cortices are going to lend that visual information once they've kind of done their job to the parietal association cortex, and it's going to make sense of it. Right? Really, really fascinating. And then we're going to jump down to the temporal association cortex. So this is actually bleeding into the occipital lobe and occipital cortex. But this one is really, really interesting because this is where you get like face and object and sound identification. So, there's injuries and also like forms of like dementia and other kinds of neurodegenerative or injuries or diseases that will, if they impact this area, you may not be able to identify or like remember a face, right? You could see someone that you've known your entire life, of that person, right? You know who that person is. It's not like that. It's just that when you look at them, they're not that same way. You might even be able to, or not be able to properly pick out, an object. So I want you to imagine, I don't know. Let's say, you're going into your closet and you want to pick out, like, say, a shirt or something that's hanging. There's obviously going to be a lot of different options inside of that closet. So what happens for us is we look at all of that and you see it as an experience, right? There's a whole bunch of things there. What can happen here is like this visual impermanence, where it's your attention will kind of be visually on these objects, will kind of go to one and then it'll jump to another, then it'll jump to another, then it'll jump to another. So imagine only being able to see one shirt at a time and not necessarily even being able to choose which shirt you're looking at. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, like when we're talking about, so this is, again, those are like the conditions. Just think like this is where you're putting things together around what do people's faces look like, which is really important to be able to identify faces. If you think about how good you are at identifying someone's face, it's an incredible feat. There's a lot of different people. I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll play those games on social media where it's like, it'll be a celebrity's mouth and I'm like able to identify it. And then I'll think to myself, I'm like, I shouldn't know this much about a person. I can recognize something by their eyebrows or their earlobes. But I mean, the thing is, that's what humans are really good at. We're good at identifying faces, but we're also good at identifying sounds and objects and voices and those types of things. Really, really, really important. And then memory formation and retrieval. Obviously, like memory is going to be really important inside of the temporal lobe. There's a deeper lobe or cortex inside of here called like the limbic cortex. That's also something that's just out of view in here, but that is still considered part of your higher order association cortex. But the limbic cortex, this is where you're getting into like the limbic system. And this is where you're getting into, the hippocampus, for example. So there's memory and how memory is distributed from short to long-term memory. Basically, my point here is with all of this, and I know I kind of went fast with it, but it's more just to kind of like show you that, yes, we can identify very specific areas and regions of the brain and say this is likely responsible for this, or at least mostly responsible for this. But it really starts to get interesting when you start blending it together and seeing how these things make sense. Because I even still kind of approach this from a reductionist standpoint. Oh, it's spatial awareness and proprioception and visual processing, attention. But all of that is wrapped up into one thing. Right? The prefrontal cortex is wrapping all of the decision making, the planning, the personality. It's wrapping all of that into one thing. And when you start thinking about it, how your memories work with faces, with sounds, with voices, it's absolutely incredible how all of this just gets placed together by the brain, right? So the reductionist viewpoint makes sense. It's important. I mean, that's anatomy. Like anatomy is inherently a reductionist science. But where I think, honestly, it gets the most exciting is when you start putting it together and seeing how everything works. So again, this is part of a larger study unit that is all about cognition, the cerebral cortex. I mean, you can see talking about like the hemispheres and just the lateralization of things, and it gets into like Broca's and Wernicke's area with like language and speech. It's really, really fascinating. Again, this is a premium feature, but we're going to go ahead and leave a link to a different study unit that you can go ahead and check out. And when you sign up for Kenhub, which is free to do, you're going to get access to all of our images, our Atlas images, our articles. So the premium features like quizzes and videos and those types of things are still going to be there, but there is a ton of value for you to go ahead and check out. So we'll put a link down in the description below. But I really appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you learned something cool. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. But I will see you in the next one.